The first thing I noticed was how nice the courthouse was. It rose 7 stories above the small stucco homes of the historic Mesquite district and was brand new and modern. It was the federal courthouse in Las Cruces, New Mexico, appearing to imitate the ancient ziggurat, surrounded by manicured palm trees and adorned with fancy copper siding and polished tan stone. Inside was no different. Grand marble entranceways, new displays proudly outlining the history of the Borderlands, sweeping windows that offered views of the mountains. It seemed that no expense had been spared. The second thing inside the courthouse that struck me was all the men in shackles. We didn't see the shackles at first because when we entered the courtroom, we were escorted to sit in the back. We just saw prisoners. There was about 50 of them sitting. It appeared most were from Latin America, Mexico, or below. They were dressed in prison clothing, depending on the detention center they were from, either bright orange or drab green. They were there to be processed, and with a few exceptions, were accused of a single crime, illegal entry. They had crossed in from Mexico into the United States. They were undocumented, and they had been caught. The judge came in, and the guards waved at us and the prisoners to stand up in respect. I wondered if this was required of us or merely courtesy. Some of my colleagues grumbled about standing only for God, or that we should take a knee instead. Now, I and a group of clergy were there to witness the crisis at the border. This was about 2 weeks ago, and we were part of a national justice coalition, Faith in Action. We hailed from many different religious traditions, representing diverse communities across the country. It was a great group committed to justice. That morning, we were in a courthouse to witness a new immigration processing system, where those accused of legal entry could be processed en masse, rather than individually based on a person's particular case. The defense lawyer stood up to start the proceedings by sharing with the prisoners what their rights were. The lawyer warned them that the court would try to intimidate them by threats of large sentences, and that the judge was not on their side. Now, we saw the shackles when the first group of 7 prisoners was called up to stand in front of the judge. Everyone had to move each time a new group got up and filed down the line. We knew from the start that they were handcuffed. You could tell by how stiff they sat, by how when they tried to raise their hand to scratch their heads, they couldn't really do it. But the shackles were around their waist and their feet. We saw them stand up to walk down the line, and they couldn't really walk. They could only really shamble. The judge would ask them to raise their right hand to swear that what they were saying was true. And of course, they couldn't really do it. It felt like a sick joke or farce to see them try each and every time to raise their hand, restricted by the chains. They tried to give it their best effort. You could tell, hoping that it would be noticed and appreciated by the stern guards and judges around them. As the hearing went on, a third thing struck me. Beyond how nice the courthouse was, how much money had been put into it, and the shackles, I was struck by how cold the courthouse was. I had worn a coat coming from outside. It was the same coat that I had been wearing a few days before as I flew out from New York City, where it was winter. I was still cold in that courthouse. And then I realized that the prisoners were all in prison t-shirts. I imagined how cold they must be, too. And of course, there was nothing that they could do about that. The whole scene was dehumanizing and dispiriting. The chains, the meager clothing, the moment when one detainee said he was struggling with his gallbladder and was told that he should fill out a form and trust the guards to submit it for him. Guards that were notorious for being untrustworthy. The contrast between the respect demanded by the white judge and the white lawyers and the armed white guards with the subservience demanded of the restrained men of color. The juxtaposition between that beautiful and ornate modern courthouse, which oozed stability and order and prosperity, and the heartbreaking reality of those men detained within it. There was no way for us clergy, who had traveled from all over the country, to know what the specific stories of those young men were, what they were feeling in the moment. But anyone with a heart could imagine. We knew they came from many different countries. Most were probably poor because if they weren't, they could have gotten a visa or avoid being caught. Almost none spoke English. Some didn't even speak Spanish, but only indigenous languages. Few knew anything about the American legal system or the innaities of immigration law. Many were fleeing violence in their home countries. Many were hoping to provide for their families, their parents, their children. Many would have invested all their savings in that effort to cross the border and build a new life. As they sat in that courtroom that day, we can imagine that all those hopes were crumbling. How long had they prepared for that journey, only to have it all thrown away? Where would they go? What if they were deported to the wrong country, a place where they knew nobody? How would they live? Where would they go? How would they have money to feed themselves? How would they even find their families and loved ones? I know that if I were in their shoes, I would have been profoundly afraid. To have traveled for months, risked your life, giving up everything you knew, to find yourself bound and shivering at the mercy of a judge who knows nothing about you, and guards who are just standing in the back, smiling and laughing and enjoying their coffee as you face the most traumatic day of your life. To be thrown into an immigration system that you can't understand because even American lawyers can't keep up with how unpredictable and fast-changing and incompetent and cruel our system is. As the trial ended for these young men, I avoided the guards on my way out. I avoided them because I knew deep down that we and them were supposed to see ourselves as on the same side. Some of my white colleagues were chatting with them, and I can see why. In this setting, we, like the guards, were free. We, like the guards, were citizens. We were Americans. I was white like them. Our families probably looked similar. In fact, I have a cousin who is a guard. We all know we could go home to our comfy houses, our stable incomes, our pets, our friends, our Netflix. In a different world, maybe we would enjoy a football game together with chips and salsa and beer. This was the powerful pull of class and racial solidarity. I could see how easy it would have been to make the guards in that room my friends. They were treating my white colleagues, those who approached them, with respect and warmth. And that, of course, is the great trap when it comes to borders and immigration. To assume that because we are comfortable, that things are okay. Because we are safe, that others are too. We identify with our own realities, our own people, whatever that means, our own sense of threat. It is to willfully, or sometimes nonchalantly, allow our own discomfort to fade away because we have the privilege of returning to our own comfort. How bad could things really be? We tell ourselves as we leave the courtroom. The guards are smiling. They laugh with us if we leave feeling that we are okay. Sitting in that courtroom, I realized two things. One, that our system encourages us to identify with those in power instead of those who are in chains. We were warmly welcomed as clergy. We were treated with respect and dignity, just like that judge, just like the guards. In contrast, the men in shackles were not supposed to be us. But of course, this was the theater of the absurd. Because who were these men anyway? Were they criminals? It's a civil violation, not a criminal one, to cross the border. Had they hurt anyone? No. Were they dangerous? No. Were they motivated by the same hopes and dreams that motivated many of our ancestors to come to America? Of course. If there's one thing the border taught me, it's that the idea of borders and who is on either side of them is farcical and dangerous. Borders not only physically separate people from each other, from resources, from jobs and opportunities, but they also separate people in our hearts and our minds. Because those young men were born on the other side of the border, they could be jailed and stripped of their humanity and chained. Because most of us were born here, we can move about freely and with dignity. Because they are brown and speak languages other than English and grew up in poverty and don't know lawyers, they don't get the same rights as us. And we can, as a country, can control their bodies through arrest and detention and deportation. Because they can't stop us. We take their children away, detain them indefinitely, and demean them like criminals. Nowhere is this divide more evident than in the border wall itself. We visited that as well. It was like an emotional gut punch seeing it in person. It was the opposite of when I first saw the Statue of Liberty. Shortly after moving to New York City, we were on a train platform in Brooklyn, and just over the horizon, we could see it in the harbor. And much to my surprise, I didn't expect to see it, I didn't expect to feel, but I was overcome with emotions to see it, having heard about it and lived with it, this image of what America could and should be, that beautiful statue. I teared up seeing it. Witnessing the wall at the border was the reverse. These huge slabs of metal that reach high above our heads and run on for miles into the distance. One of the immigrant community organizers called it a monument to hate. A colleague wanted to take a picture of it, and so we posed together. And by force of habit, I smiled in the photo like I was a tourist. And I look at this photo and I feel ashamed because it is such a dark thing. Yet we just have to look through the slats, these huge slats, and see the people through them. They are there. A man was pushing a cart with his dog following him behind. They were people, just like us, so close we could shake their hands through the bars and look into each other's eyes. But we would know, of course, that we were a world away. We were separated by those in power, by this wall, this symbol of difference. Everyone knew the wall was there to keep us apart, to keep that man and his dog away from us. Those on our side of the border, we could go there, of course, if we wanted to. I remember crossing the border when I was a child with my parents. We bought a boat and just floated across. Easy. Churches used to hold their vigils by that wall once when it was just a chain link fence that went up to your waist. They don't let you do that anymore. And as we were there, we saw an ice truck pull up to watch us. Looking across the wall through the great slabs of metal, it was impossible to ignore the obvious. It is deeply unfair and unjust that they were there and we were here. That because I was born in Cleveland, I have opportunities and comforts that they will never have. That I can fly anywhere I want. I can live and work in one of the wealthiest communities in the world. I can eat at organic food. I can walk in Central Park. I can not worry about someday someone will come to my door and demand to take me and my wife away. Borders are things drawn by conquerors and colonizers and corporations. They are drawn for profit and for racism. They are designed to give some people opportunities and to deprive it from others. That's the history of our southern border, and that's what's playing out right now. In their insidiousness, borders tell us that we deserve what we have and others do not. Borders tell us that we must protect ourselves and what we have because there is not enough for everyone. Borders categorize human beings as deserving and undeserving. When we see 50 young men shivering in chains in a beautiful courthouse funded by our tax dollars, borders tell us that they are trespassers, criminals, and that they deserve what they get. They tell us they are dangerous and stealing our jobs. They tell us that they deserve everything that is happening to them, that they are doing it for our protection and our safety. Borders do not tell us that those young men shivering in shackles are brave. They do not tell us that they have sacrificed so much. They do not tell us that they are proud survivors of a system in a world that wants to desperately keep them in their place. It does not tell us that they are willing to work back-breaking labor just so that they and their loved ones can live a life like ours. The men in chains deserve to be seen in this completeness. They feel as deeply, they think as acutely, they love as fully. They love freedom, they deserve justice, they care for their family no less than anyone in this room. They could be our brothers, they could be our fathers, they could be our sons, they could be us in another life. I'm not suggesting that our world is ready to be borderless. But when borders drive a wedge between human beings, then they have lost their moral legitimacy. The way that our borders have been made in this country, especially our southern borders, they have been made to protect those with a great deal and to keep those who have very little at the bottom. Borders fool us into thinking that we are safer, but they are only safe for those who live on the right side. And we need to get to a place in our society where that means that they are not safe at all. That borders who are only safe for some people are safe for no one. And that is enough for us to break them down. We cannot be just and good if we are only just and good for ourselves. We cannot care only about Americans as if our lives somehow magically matter more than anyone else's lives. Borders lie to us and tell us that those on the wrong side are people that we don't really have to care about. That the unfairness of borders between the people who live on that side and this side, that's just how things are. It's a tempting and pernicious belief because it lets us off the hook. If how things are just how things are, and we don't have to do anything, then things will always stay the same. And our siblings on the other side will continue to suffer at our hands. We can tell ourselves all the myths about the border, about our safety and our protection, about who is coming over and who is not. But no border removes our responsibility to one another. Those men in shackles are our people, as much as anyone in the world, as much as the guards are, as much as the people in our neighborhood are, as much as the people in our hometowns are. Those men in shackles deserve the same loyalty, the same tenderness, the same kinship, the same love. The final truth is this: love knows no borders. God knows no borders. The right to life and liberty and happiness knows no borders. Borders are phony, made up tools of power and profit, not to serve people. So do not let the idea of borders convince you that our responsibility to one another changes a single bit based on the side of the border we are on. Only once we understand this will things begin to change. Only once we begin to look at how we understand borders will the concentration camps at our southern border be closed, and the children are reunited with their families, and the young men in that courthouse and all those who come after them will be freed from their shackles. Only then will we truly be safe and truly live in peace. May we look forward to that day sooner than later. Amen.